Welcome to the Bayou Teche, 1890, a place where the cypress trees lean low over dark, still waters and the fog rolls in like whispered secrets. A place where the night feels alive and even the wind seems to speak. On the edge of St. Martin Parish, the locals still tell of Mère Celestine Broussard, the midwife who knew the secrets of herbs and shadows, who walked the marshes with lanterns, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the oil lamp, carrying more than just the cries of newborns. She carried the warnings of a world that few dared to notice. It was the month of October, the year 1890, when something shifted along the bayou. The river, usually lazy, began to carry voices at dusk, faint echoing voices that no one could trace. Footsteps in the mud where none had walked. Lanterns swinging in the distance, but when approached, no one was there. The swamp had its own rhythm, and the people of the bayou knew better than to ignore it. Whispers spoke of watchers from the cypress shadows, creatures that moved like the fog, neither fully human nor fully spirit. Before we continue, consider this. The newspapers of New Orleans mention disappearances, a fate unknown here, a missing body there, runaway slaves' notices that ended in question marks, reports filed in the Freedmen's Bureau hinting at strange nocturnal sightings among the plantations. But no one ever confirmed the cause. Only the effect, the emptiness left behind. The community, Afro-Creole and Cajun alike, began to murmur about Mère Celestine's knowledge, about her ability to commune with forces unseen. Some said she had called the spirits intentionally. Others whispered that she was simply caught in a current she could not control. The night itself seemed complicit. Fog curling around the cypress knees, Spanish moss dangling like veils over the water. The lanterns of passing boats flickered shadows, danced unnaturally. Some claimed to see shapes watching from the trees. Glowing eyes just beyond reach, a figure moving silently along the riverbank. Then came the screams, or perhaps the echoes of screams from decades past, echoing over the water like a hymn gone wrong. Parents held children closer, dogs refused to enter the swamp. And yet curiosity persisted. The young men of the parish daring each other to approach the banks, lanterns in hand, hearts beating like drums. All returned shaken. Some swore they had glimpsed figures that mirrored themselves, and others claimed to hear voices calling their own names. And in the quiet moments when the wind paused, when even the insects held their breath, there was Mère Celestine's laugh, soft, knowing, impossibly close, though she had vanished months before. Or had she? The locals still left offerings on the riverbank. Small coins, tiny crosses, scraps of cloth. Anything to appease the watchers. Anything to keep their families safe. The swamp keeps its secrets well. The papers never explained it. The maps never marked it. And the law never arrived in time to witness it. But the stories persisted, carried by the river, whispered among the reeds, recounted over kitchen tables and around firelight, over and over. The same refrain. What watches from the cypress shadows? And you are here now, listening, wondering if perhaps you too will see what the bayou wants you to see. Step lightly. Remember the lanterns, remember the whispers, and remember, do not look back. For those who do, they are never the same again. October 1890. Bayou Teche stretched through the heart of St. Martin Parish like a dark vein of memory and water. The river sluggish, churning in a way that seemed alive. Fog rolling off its surface in thick, pale blankets, brushing against the cypress knees that jutted like jagged teeth from the murky water. Spanish moss hanging low, dripping condensation onto the water below. The smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and distant fires from sugarcane harvests mingling in the humid air. It was a place both ordinary and uncanny, where time seemed to move differently. where history and legend entwined, and where the shadows carried voices from generations past. The parish itself was a patchwork of small settlements and plantations. Cabins scattered along winding mud paths, some painted in fading colors, others blackened from storms or old fires. Smoke spiraling from crooked chimneys in the morning sun, carrying the scent of wood smoke cooking fires and herbs. Children running barefoot through puddles. Dogs barking, sometimes ceasing abruptly, as if the swamp demanded silence. The sugar-cane fields stretched in endless rows, leaves slick with dew. The occasional flicker of fire from harvest torches painting the green stalks in fleeting orange light. The work was grueling, the land unforgiving, and the people knew the cost. Yet even amidst labor and survival, the swamp whispered, always whispered. Mère Celestine's cabin sat on a slight rise above a bend in the river, humble yet resolute. A weathered frame structure with a low slanted roof. Lanterns hung from porch eaves, casting soft pools of light on the muddy earth. Wind chimes of tin and bone swayed gently, producing a hollow metallic song when the breeze caught them just right. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. Sage, rue, belladonna, juniper. Each bundle placed meticulously, not for decoration, but as protection, as guidance, as invitation. The locals whispered that she could see beyond the veil, that her lantern guided spirits as much as humans, that her footsteps left echoes that carried warnings and omens. The community surrounding her was a tapestry of Afro-Creole families, Cajun settlers, and a few lingering white landowners who had weathered the Civil War. The Creole families preserved oral histories of enslavement resilience and the lingering presence of those lost along the river. The Cajun families spoke of gris-gris charms, voodoo rites, and spirits that walked in the fog. And through all of it, a delicate tension persisted. Knowledge passed in whispers, warnings uttered quietly. Do not wander after dusk. Leave a charm for the watchers. The swamp sees everything, remembers everything. By daylight, the bayou seemed tranquil. Mist rising in the morning sun, transforming the water into a silver mirror. Birds calling in distant trees, frogs croaking in irregular rhythms, the occasional splash of fish disturbing the mirrored surface. A canoe gliding silently, the paddle cutting water without a sound. But by nightfall, everything changed. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. Shapes appeared and vanished in the fog. Lanterns flickered in ways that seemed deliberate, almost sentient. And the very air grew dense, heavy with anticipation, as though the bayou itself breathed and waited for those who dared tread its paths. Official records of St. Martin Parish provide only fragments. Freedmen's Bureau reports from 1889 to 1890 mention disputes over land labor contracts, missing workers. Occasional notices in local newspapers detailed disappearances along the Teche. Fate unknown, scribbled repeatedly. Military patrols recorded odd nocturnal sounds, glimpses of figures in the marsh, livestock found missing or mutilated. All noted as anomalies, footnotes to a reality that defied documentation. The swamp remembered. Even when ink faded, even when witnesses grew silent. Geography shaped the fate of the region. Winding waterways and hidden tributaries created labyrinths where a traveler could become lost within hours. The dense cypress and oak forests concealed paths and footprints alike. Heavy rains altered the river's course overnight, erasing familiar markers. The locals knew which routes the swamp allowed and which it would punish. Lanterns were carried, herbs clutched, prayers whispered under breath. Each step measured, each breath counted. For to anger the bayou was to risk disappearance, or worse. Within the plantations, the atmosphere carried the weight of the past. Abandoned cotton fields, barns with sagging roofs. Wind rushing through broken doors and shutters producing groans and moans that could be mistaken for voices. The energy of labor suffering and lost souls lingered. The elders spoke of footsteps along the paths at night, of sugar-cane rustling without wind, of figures glimpsed between the stalks. Some claimed to see glowing eyes watching from the shadows. Others whispered of the phantom regiment. Soldiers who marched in the fog long after the war had ended, their uniforms, faded boots sinking into mud drums, echoing like distant thunder. Into this world moved Mère Celestine, her lantern illuminating the darkness in small, warm pools of light, herbs swinging from her arms, whispers of prayer on her lips, songs murmured to guide the spirits, to protect the living. She walked the thin line between history and myth, reality and folklore, tending to births, sickness, and death, yet observing everything beyond human perception. The disappearances, the flickers in the fog, the lanterns that moved alone, all recorded in memory and ritual. Each observation marked in the communal consciousness. The swamp rewarded those attuned to it, and punished those who were not. Men returning from fields found footprints ending abruptly in mud. Tools missing, lanterns extinguished, whispers in the wind that seemed to call their names. At night the sounds intensified. Owls cried out. Frogs croaked in erratic rhythms. The wind sighed through the moss. And footsteps echoed with no one to cast them. The trees themselves seemed to groan, to bend in warning. Along the riverbanks, offerings were placed. Coins, small crosses, charms, gifts to appease watchers to ensure safe passage. Locals knew that to ignore these rites was to invite danger. Disappearances were reported. Sometimes returning those affected, changed haunted. Eyes hollow, voices trembling, hands quivering with unseen marks. This was Bayou Teche, a landscape where history is etched not only in documents, but in shadow, in sound, in ritual. Where fact and legend intertwine. Where every step, every flicker of lantern, every whisper could mean life or vanishing. And into this tenuous, haunted equilibrium moved Mère Celestine, bridging the worlds of living and dead, seen and unseen, recorded history and oral tradition. Walking paths both ordinary and uncanny, where a single misstep could be remembered forever. The river itself held memory. Silt and mud preserving footprints, currents carrying whispers. Birds flying low, startled by unseen movement. Frogs and fish adding rhythm to the night's song. Lantern light reflecting like fire on water. A shape moving just beyond perception, fleeting, almost imagined. And yet witnesses swore it existed. The swamp taught caution. It taught respect. And above all, it demanded acknowledgement. It was into this dense, humid, and perilous environment that the events of October 1890 unfolded. The stage was set, the actors both human and spectral, the line between reality and legend already blurred, and the whispers in the cypress, waiting, watching, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to enter the shadows. The records are sparse, fragments scattered across yellowing pages, ink fading with time, yet each one hints at the strange tapestry that enveloped Bayou Teche in 1890. Freedmen's Bureau ledgers note complaints from plantation owners about missing laborers, men, women, children. Fate unknown scrawled repeatedly, no explanation, no follow-up. Merely the acknowledgement that something had slipped beyond comprehension. Some entries are curt, dry, formal, reporting absentee labor as if the absence itself were ordinary. Yet beneath the surface the words carry unease, a recognition that these vanishings were not merely happenstance. Newspaper clippings from nearby New Orleans tell similar tales. Small paragraphs tucked between advertisements and obituaries, headlines neutral, almost dismissive. Worker disappears along Teche. Lantern found floating owner now missing. Yet the descriptions grow vivid upon closer inspection. Eyewitnesses describe lanterns moving on their own, shadows that do not match any figure present. Cries heard in the fog, voices calling names only to vanish when approached. The reporters, restrained by propriety and social expectation, left much unsaid. But the undertones lingered. The air of dread. The acknowledgement of something beyond human control. Military patrol logs preserved in regional archives mention unexplained movements near the Teche, shadows crossing patrol paths, sudden sounds, boots in mud with no owner, animals, disturbed livestock gone. Some logs even note soldiers feeling watched, though no one could confirm an observer. One officer wrote in a faint ink, "The swamp seems alive, as if it notes our passage, remembers our names. Facts documented, yet imbued with the aura of myth." The line between what was recorded and what was feared had already begun to blur. Oral traditions filled the spaces where records fall silent. WPA interviews from decades later recall elders telling stories of Mère Celestine. She could see the spirits walking at night. Her lantern guided the lost. She knew when a person would vanish before it happened. Children listened with wide eyes as parents whispered warnings. Never go to the water alone after dusk. Leave a coin on the bank. The watchers remember. Even the smallest rituals carried weight. Small gestures of acknowledgement toward unseen presences. Gestures that might spare life, or at least protect the soul. The convergence of documented fact and folklore is striking. Plantation reports of missing workers, coupled with stories of the lantern woman walking the banks. A figure in a faded dress, head wrapped tightly, eyes gleaming in the oil lamp's light. She moved with purpose, her steps measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Some claimed she could call the lost back. Others whispered she had inadvertently awakened forces better left undisturbed. In the community, her name carried reverence and fear, a duality mirrored in the reports and the tales. A particularly chilling account comes from a plantation ledger dated October 12, 1890. A young field hand named Jean-Baptiste failed to return from the cane fields at dusk. Supervisors searched. Neighbors scoured the banks. Only a lantern was found bobbing gently on the river. No footprints. Nothing to suggest struggle. The boy's hat caught on a branch wet with dew, as if he had simply vanished into the air. The ledger notes coldly, fate unknown. Yet the elders whispered that he had wandered into the swamps watching, that he had seen the eyes among the cypress, and that he would never truly leave. Another WPA interview recounts the tale of a young woman, Amélie, late at night returning from the river with laundry. The mist was heavy, draping everything in gray. She swore she saw Mère Celestine walking toward her lantern held high. The light reflected in the water like molten gold. As the figure drew near, Amélie felt the air thicken, the shadows stretch unnaturally. Suddenly the lantern vanished, and Amélie found herself alone, clutching the bundle of clothes she had carried. Shivering, she ran home. Her family, listening, nodded knowingly. They had heard similar stories and understood. Some things in the swamp watch. Some things do not forgive. Even the wildlife seemed to bear witness. Frogs croaking in strange, irregular patterns. Birds flying low, startled by movement unseen. Dogs growling at emptiness. The river itself shifting, carrying strange reflections. Shapes flickering just below the surface. These occurrences are documented in letters from visiting traders. Merchants who came to purchase sugar, cotton, and produce. They described the bayou as unnerving, beautiful, alive, almost conscious. One letter reads, "The swamp is like a mirror and a memory. It remembers those who walk upon it, and perhaps it holds them too. A fact recorded in ink, a truth whispered in shadow." The intertwining of fact and folklore continued with the Phantom Regiment stories. African American soldiers recalled in newspapers and army logs. Some had been stationed nearby during reconstruction. Accounts tell of units marching silently through fog, drums echoing without source, figures appearing and disappearing. Historians note these reports in marginalia, unsure whether to classify them as factual or rumor. Yet the community listening to oral histories decades later insisted they were real, a manifestation of unfinished business, the echo of lives constrained, betrayed, lost. These soldiers, like the missing laborers, became part of the bayou's memory, fact and story coexisting. Mère Celestine herself was not merely a passive observer. She intervened, tending the sick, helping the birthing, performing rituals meant to soothe spirits or perhaps to guide them. Some whispered she could see a person's fate simply by the way they crossed a muddy path, or by how their shadow fell under moonlight. She marked her lanterns with small charms, sang quietly to the water, sometimes leaving coins or scraps of cloth on the banks, gifts to appease the watchers, gifts to delay disappearance. Her knowledge, a blend of herbal medicine, superstition, and ancestral guidance, was invaluable, yet perilous. Accounts of her movements intertwine with the vanishings. When a person disappeared, often Mère Celestine had been nearby, not as perpetrator, but as witness, or perhaps mediator. Oral narratives suggest she tried to communicate with those lost or to guide them back, at times returning them changed, haunted, or carrying warnings for the living. Yet her presence was never questioned. She was respected, feared, almost mythic. And that myth colored every ledger, letter, and story. Fact and folklore, entwined like the roots of the cypress, impossible to separate. The bayou itself seems a participant, its waters reflecting and concealing, the trees shifting, the fog thickening as if in acknowledgement, the sounds of the swamp forming a rhythm, a heartbeat, pulses that marked the passage of time, of life, of disappearance. Those who traversed it felt the weight of history, the gaze of something watching from the cypress shadows, the invisible audience, acknowledging each step, each breath, each event recorded, in ledger, in letter, in oral recounting, a palimpsest of the human and spectral. As night fell, lanterns flickering along riverbanks, whispers of the lost carried on the wind. The community gathered inside cabins, speaking in hushed tones, recounting what had been, what might be, what they feared would come. Children listened with wide eyes. Elders reminded them of the offerings, the charms, the prayers, and always the refrain. What watches from the cypress shadows? A question echoed in every document, every story, every note. The bayou held its secrets, yet insisted they be acknowledged. Fact and folklore, ledger and whisper, newspaper and oral recounting, all converged to create a complex, haunted portrait of Bayou Teche in 1890. A swamp alive with memory, with observation, with judgment. And in the midst of it all, Mère Celestine, walking the boundary, mediating, observing, a bridge between the worlds, a human thread running through the thick tapestry of history and myth. And the shadows continued to watch. The nights along Bayou Teche grew heavier, charged with a tension that seemed to seep into the very water. The cypress shadows stretching longer, fog curling thickly along the riverbanks, swallowing paths, lanterns' footsteps. And the disappearances began in earnest. The first was subtle, almost dismissible. Etienne, a young laborer from the sugarcane fields near Grand Coteau. Late one evening, he set out to fetch water, lantern swinging in trembling hands, boots sinking into thick mud, the river whispering a language unknown. He never returned. Only the echo of his name floated on the wind. Neighbors found his lantern gently rocking on the bank. No footprints, no signs of struggle, only absence. The newspapers recorded fate unknown. A phrase dry neutral, inadequate to capture the dread settling over the parish. 2 nights later, a dilapidated cabin on the outskirts flickered with light, abandoned for decades. Yet movement seemed alive within. Doors creaked though no wind blew. Smoke rose from a chimney that had long since collapsed. A group of young men daring each other approached with lanterns in hand, mud sucking at their boots, hearts hammering. They entered. Nothing. Yet outside one swore he saw Etienne, standing by the Cypress, watching. Before he disappeared into the fog, whispered tales spread rapidly, cabin to cabin, porch to porch. The swamp watches, and sometimes it collects. The phrase lingered in every conversation, a warning embedded in the memory of the living. The community moved cautiously. Shadows became markers of presence. Each flicker of light or unusual sound considered significant. Mère Celestine walked these paths nightly, lantern in hand, herbs swinging from her belt. Prayers murmured under breath, the air around her thick with expectation. She moved deliberately through cane fields, riverbanks, and cabins, observing patterns, noting anomalies. The rustle of leaves, too deliberate. A shadow paused unnaturally. A lantern appeared where none had been. These signs guided her actions, dictated her rituals. Every step a balance between protection and provocation. Another disappearance. Marguerite, a midwife in training, late at night carrying linens from the river. The fog rolled in dense and heavy. Shapes shifted within it. Whispers called her name. Marguerite. Marguerite. She turned. Nothing. Yet the water shimmered unnaturally. A lantern floated past, flickering, then vanished. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the fog. Neighbors found her hours later, shivering, eyes wide, reporting faint laughter in the distance. A lantern hovering along the bank, moving with deliberate purpose, guiding or mocking. The lines between fear and observation blurred, reality and folklore intertwined. Across the bayou, traders' letters from nearby towns recounted strange observations, floating lanterns, figures glimpsed on distant banks, cries echoing from nowhere. The river itself remembers the dead one, trader wrote, their eyes glinting in the cypress, their whispers following the living. Historians later categorized these as anecdotal, folklore. Yet alongside Freedmen's Bureau reports and newspapers, a pattern emerged. Foggy nights, disappearances, lanterns flickering on river bends, shadows stretching beyond perception. The bayou, it seemed, had a memory, a will of its own. Then came the night of fire, a small settlement long abandoned, smoke rising from fields untouched for years. Yet the flames danced in impossible ways. Lanterns bobbed within the blaze, shadows moving amid the fire, impossible to discern from reality. Families huddled in neighboring cabins. Some claimed to see shadows cross open fields. Others heard phantom drums, soldiers from a phantom regiment marching silently through the fog. Drums echoing over the water. The fire consumed nothing, yet fear became tangible, etched into memory. Even livestock behaved strangely. Cows found dead near riverbanks, horses trembling, refusing water from the swamp, dogs barking at emptiness. The watchers, unseen, unrecorded, patrolling the edges of perception. Names whispered: Etienne, Marguerite, Henri, Louis. Each incident adding weight to the parish's unease. Every night brought new disappearances, new lantern sightings, new signs. The swamp asserting its presence, its claim. Mère Celestine's role intensified, moving deliberately through marshes, performing rituals along riverbanks, leaving coins, scraps of cloth charms. Each action measured, to appease or guide, cataloging patterns of disappearances, lanterns appearing without hand, shadows moving against wind. She became a living ledger, a record of human and spectral interaction. Some nights she returned with the missing, changed, eyes haunted, stories whispered in cabins. Sometimes she returned alone, whispering warnings, gestures of appeasement. The boundary between human and spirit blurred. She became both protector and witness, mediator of forces beyond comprehension. A series of incidents in late October further heightened tension. Henri and Louis brothers returning late from hunting. Fog thick as ink. River black and slick. Lanterns flickering. Henri glimpsed a figure in the cypress, tall, cloaked, lantern glinting, motionless. He called to his brother, but Louis vanished, footprints ending abruptly in mud. Only Henri remained, eyes wide, recounting voices calling his name, urging him toward shadows. The watchers of the Teche. Ledger notes, Louis, fate unknown. The swamp claimed another, quietly, deliberately. Throughout these nights, the convergence of fact and folklore became undeniable. Plantation ledgers documenting missing laborers, newspapers recounting lanterns floating alone, military logs noting anomalous patrols, oral histories describing Mère Celestine, the Phantom Regiment, ghostly marches, vanished children, all forming a mosaic, a labyrinth. Ordinary life colliding with uncanny realities, evidence of patterns, yet impossible to predict, impossible to resist. Occasionally some returned, altered, haunted, eyes reflecting a memory of what cannot be described, recounting whispers, lanterns floating, shadows moving contrary to wind, warnings carried forward, small acts ensuring survival. The bayou demanded respect. Every story, every ledger, every whisper, a note in its rhythm. Fact layer and folklore layer, entwined, inseparable. By the end of October, unease had settled. The parish felt different, the river reflecting the moon in distorted shapes. Lanterns flickered along hidden paths, families checking charms, leaving offerings on banks, acknowledgement of what had occurred and what was yet to occur. The rhythm of the swamp, nurturing, claiming, watching, and the community adapted, learned, lived under its gaze. Mère Celestine became mythic, her lanterns a guide, a warning, her steps cataloging the interaction of human and spectral, the flicker of light marking events, shadows stretching across mud and water. Some nights returning those believed lost, changed. Others she returned alone, whispering warnings, small gestures of appeasement. She embodied the living link between history and myth, reality and legend. The swamp itself seemed to bend to her presence, acknowledging her, responding to her movements. As the nights pressed on, the incidents mounting, disappearances, sightings, ghostly lanterns, anomalous sounds, whispers in fog. The parish recognized the pattern, a tapestry of the unseen, woven through fact and folklore. And always, the watchers remained, silent, observant, patient. By the final days of October, Bayou Teche hummed with life beyond human comprehension. Cypress shadows deepened, mist thickened. Lanterns flickered, moved as if by unseen hands. Whispers carried warnings, memories guidance. Incidents created a living record, a warning, an invitation. Fact and folklore, inseparable. And the parish waited, knowing the swamp never forgot, knowing that the watchers always watched. By the beginning of November, the events along Bayou Teche had begun to accumulate into something undeniable, something that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The Freedmen's Bureau archives contained repeated notations, entries that were stark factual yet suggestive. Reports of missing workers now spanned entire plantations. Fate unknown, recorded beside each name, sometimes with a brief addendum: last seen near the river bend, lanterns observed in mist, witness unable to account. The words precise, clinical, yet they could not erase the unease that clung to each line. Maps from the period preserved in regional collections showed the Teche in meticulous detail. Winding tributaries, hidden channels, stretches of marsh where the fog gathered thickest. Surveyor notes indicated areas prone to disappearances. Small annotations in pencil. Children vanished here. Lantern sightings reported. Paths that curved unexpectedly, swallowing footprints. Logs that ended abruptly in mud. Even the cartographers, unaware perhaps of the legends surrounding these waterways, documented what would later intertwine with folklore. Their lines and measurements, silent witnesses to the uncanny. Military dispatches from nearby forts added another layer of verification. Officers reported patrols along the swamp's edge, shadows crossing paths, lanterns bobbing in isolated fog patches, boots in the mud with no owner. At times, patrols returned shaken, claiming to hear names whispered in the wind, voices calling over water, drums echoing in patterns that seemed intentional. Some letters included sketches, crude yet depicting the figure of a woman with a lantern, long robes, a head wrap. Some identified her as Mère Celestine, others simply as the Swamp Woman. Facts noted, yet hovering on the edge of belief. Oral histories gathered decades later through WPA interviews provide depth, nuance, texture. She walked between the worlds, one elder recalled. Mère Celestine, lantern in hand, calling the lost, calming the restless. The dream narratives from the community are equally compelling. Villagers reporting visions of shadows moving under moonlight, glowing eyes in cypress branches, footsteps echoing from nowhere, dreams repeating real events. Etienne seen in the fog, Marguerite's lantern floating along the river, Henri following the watchers' voices, memory and prophecy intertwining, folklore codifying fact, and fact giving weight to legend. The interplay of these layers became most apparent during mid-November, when reports of vanishings coincided with strange, almost ritualistic occurrences. Along the eastern bend, the riverbanks showed signs. Small stones arranged in patterns, pieces of cloth tied to low-hanging branches, herbs scattered along the paths, offerings left for unknown entities. Observers noted that these rituals were remarkably consistent across separate households. Independent families, yet identical gestures. Coins, small crosses, charms, repeated as though following an unspoken protocol. The swamp itself, reinforcing tradition, memory warning. Dream narratives also intensified. One account from an elderly Creole woman recounted a vision in which Mère Celestine floated above the swamp, her lantern casting golden light on the twisted water. Shadowy figures moving beneath her, calling to the living. The woman awoke trembling. The details exact to later disappearances. The lanterns, the shapes, the voices calling names. Historians later cross-reference these dreams with actual events, instances where individuals vanished, locations matching dreamscapes, reinforcing the notion that fact and folklore were not merely adjacent, but entwined, inseparable. On November 14th, the disappearance of two young boys, Pierre and Louis, became a focal incident. Eyewitnesses recalled a lantern flickering among the cypress, figures moving against the wind, the fog so thick that visibility was no more than a few feet. The boys were last seen laughing at the river's edge. Mère Celestine was reportedly nearby, moving along the banks, her lantern casting light on the water, yet the shadows deepening beyond its reach. In the morning, the children were gone, only small footprints leading to nowhere. The ledger recorded fate unknown, a repetition that had become chillingly familiar. The swamp responded to human behavior. Warnings ignored, disrespect, curiosity, trespass. At night, shadows deepened. Lanterns appeared sometimes stationary, sometimes moving. Water seemed to ripple in unnatural patterns. The sounds of the swamp shifted, frogs croaking erratically, owls calling out of sequence, the wind sighing through Spanish moss. Every element conspiring to convey the presence of watchers, unseen, yet known, acknowledged in offerings, prayers, whispers. Community responses evolved. Families reinforced rituals, leaving gifts along the riverbanks, murmuring prayers, ensuring safe passage. Even visitors unaware of local protocol noticed the subtle patterns. A coin tied to a branch, herbs arranged at a path's fork, whispered warnings from neighbors. Do not linger at dusk. Leave an offering, even if you do not believe. Every act recognized the swamp's authority, and the watchers who moved silently within it. The Phantom Regiment narratives also expanded. Soldiers long after Reconstruction had ended, seen marching through mist-laden fields, drums echoing faintly. No bodies observed, no human source for sound, yet persistent across accounts. Locals spoke of them in hushed tones, marching silently past cabins, over riverbanks. The presence as much spiritual as corporeal. A warning, a reflection of past suffering, a reminder of unquiet history. Fact layer recorded the existence of these units. Folklore layer interpreted their ongoing presence. Intertwined, inseparable, Mayor Celestine's interventions continued, aiding those lost or endangered, performing rituals designed to mitigate the watchers' claims, leaving offerings, chanting softly, guiding lanterns along the marsh paths. Some nights, she returned with the missing, altered, haunted, carrying memories of the swamp's will. Other nights, she returned alone, whispering warnings. Gestures meant to appease, to delay, to negotiate with forces beyond understanding. Every movement deliberate, every act recorded in memory and ritual, bridging fact and folklore, ensuring continuity, survival. By late November, the pattern of incidents had solidified. Disappearances, sightings, lanterns drifting, shadows stretching across paths, reports confirming each other, letters from traders, militia logs, oral histories, dream narratives, each layer validating the others. Fact layer providing framework. Folklore layer providing depth, narrative coherence, a mosaic of observation and interpretation. On November 28th, a particularly unnerving case emerged. A traveling merchant reported crossing the Teche at night. Lanterns floating along the banks, shadows moving counter to the wind. He swore he heard voices calling names, some known, some foreign. Shapes materializing, then dissipating, reaching toward him. He escaped, but left detailed notes in the parish archives, corroborated in part by villagers' accounts, lending credence to both fact and folklore. The swamp's narrative expanding, absorbing every new event, every human reaction, every whispered story. By the month's end, offerings lined riverbanks, prayers repeated, charms placed meticulously, families attentive to every nuance of the swamp. Lanterns watched closely, shadows tracked. Every disappearance, every anomalous sighting, every dream narrative wove a dense tapestry, reinforcing respect, fear, knowledge. The watchers remained ever present, silent, deliberate, patient. Their presence a constant reminder that the bayou remembered, that it recorded, that it acted. Fact and folklore, ledger and dream, newspaper and whisper, all merged into a single living record. The swamp, an entity with memory, judgment, and intent. The parish and Mère Celestine existed within this web, responding, recording, mediating. Every ritual, every gesture, every observation mattered. Small acts of appeasement, of respect, of recognition, preserved life, or at least prevented disappearance. The watchers were unyielding, the swamp vigilant, and history, both human and spectral, continued to unfold. And so the tapestry of Bayou Teche in 1890 remained intricate, vibrant, terrifying. Fact layer documented events with ink ledger and report. Folklore layer interpreted events with narrative, ritual, and dream, both inseparable, each validating the other. Each disappearance, each lantern, each shadow, a note in the swamp's eternal ledger. And the watchers remained, ever present, patient, awaiting the next story to inscribe. By early December, the incidents along Bayou Teche had grown into a mosaic of fear and fascination. Whispers carried farther, stories stretched across settlements, and something in the swamp seemed to respond. The ledger entries, now numerous, spoke of more disappearances, lanterns found drifting alone, footprints ending abruptly in mud, sightings of figures moving against the fog, officers' reports noting patrols disturbed, livestock missing, all recorded, coldly, factually. Yet each note pulsed with unspoken dread. Mère Celestine's role became ever more critical, her lantern swinging steadily, herbs tucked into her belt, chants whispered softly under her breath. She moved along the riverbanks, observing, cataloging, intervening, guiding those who strayed too close. Sometimes she returned with the missing, altered, haunted, eyes reflecting the fog, the shadows, the watchers themselves. Other nights, she returned alone, clutching small charms, coins, scraps of cloth, murmuring warnings, gestures meant to appease, to negotiate. The swamp, insistent, patient, watching. A series of documents discovered in a later archive reveal the intensity of that period. Correspondence from plantation overseers, detailing disappearances with meticulous coldness. Some accompanied by sketches, crude depictions of a woman holding a lantern, long robes, head wrapped tight, often identified as Mère Celestine, the swamp woman. Some officers wrote in coded language, figures observed in fog, lanterns floating independently, voices echoing along river bends. The entries factual, yet the tone betrayed unease, the human mind acknowledging something beyond comprehension. Dream narratives and folklore deepen the picture. Villagers reported visions where shadows stretched impossibly long, lanterns drifting over water, whispers calling names, footsteps echoing without source. In some accounts, Mère Celestine floated above the swamp, guiding the lost, the unseen, sometimes calling back those believed taken, other times unable to intervene. The dreams repeated across households often mirrored real events. Disappearances, sightings, lanterns floating, shadows shifting, a cyclical pattern of memory and warning. One of the most haunting incidents occurred on December 5th. Henri, the surviving brother from earlier incidents, ventured near the Teche at night. Mist heavy, lantern trembling. He glimpsed figures among the cypress, tall, shadowed, lanterns flickering in their hands, calling names, some familiar, some foreign. Henri followed, heart pounding, the fog swallowing sound and sight. A footstep echoed behind him, yet no one was there. The whispers intensified, urging, warning, directing. He stumbled into an open area and saw Mère Celestine, her lantern illuminating the water, floating, almost unreal. Henri froze, a cold realization that the swamp itself was alive, recording, judging, claiming. Meanwhile, accounts of ritual offerings multiplied. Coins arranged in patterns on banks, scraps of cloth tied to branches, herbs scattered at path forks. These actions, repeated independently by multiple families, suggested a communal understanding, the swamp demanding recognition, an acknowledgement of watchers unseen. The objects themselves, preserved traces, tangible evidence of belief, fear, and survival, small gestures that might preserve life, or at least delay disappearance. Reports from travelers corroborated these narratives. Traders moving along the Teche, unaware of local rituals, noticed lanterns floating along the river, shadows moving counter to wind, cries echoing without source, sketches made in letters, later verified by villagers. Fact layer recording the human attempt to make sense. Folklore layer providing interpretation, warning, and meaning, both inseparable, both alive. The culmination of these incidents came in mid-December. A coordinated disappearance, a group traveling at night, lanterns swinging, fog thick as wool. Each person vanishing in succession. No footprints, no struggle, only the echo of names on the wind. The parish itself trembled, panic spreading quietly, parents holding children close, elders muttering prayers, offerings left hastily on the banks, small protections now urgent. The ledger noted fate unknown, entire party missing, a factual record that could not convey the terror, the palpable tension, the sense of being observed, claimed, remembered. Some survivors returned, changed, haunted, recounting lanterns drifting, shadows moving against the wind, whispers calling names, visions of Mère Celestine walking above the swamp, guiding, warning. The human mind struggled to process, reality and legend interwoven. Fact layer and folklore layer merging into a single lived experience. The swamp itself a witness, an actor, an arbiter. By the end of these nights, the cumulative effect was undeniable. The parish itself altered. The river reflecting moonlight distorted by mist. The cypress shadows elongated. Lanterns flickering with unseen movement. Families meticulously observing rituals, leaving offerings, murmuring prayers. The swamp, alive, ever present. A repository of memory, of disappearances, of warnings. The watchers, patient, deliberate, inescapable. The climax of the narrative is both subtle and overwhelming. Small gestures, rituals, ledger entries, whispers, lanterns, converge, building tension, shaping the memory of the community. Every disappearance, every flicker of light, every shadow, a note in the swamp's ledger. The watchers, observed, judged, recorded, and occasionally returned those altered. Reminders of the swamp's presence, of its power, of its claim. Mère Celestine's presence remained central. A bridge between the human and spectral. Mediator of events, recorder of anomalies, guide to the lost. Her lantern, swinging steadily, herbs tucked into her belt, prayers whispered softly. She catalogued patterns, observed behaviors, and maintained a tenuous equilibrium. Without her, the incidents might have escalated further. The swamp, unyielding, persistent, patient. December 31st approached. The culmination of months of tension. Disappearances, lantern sightings, shadow movements, offerings, rituals, prayers, dreams, and visions, all converged. The bayou hummed with a rhythm of memory and judgment. The watchers, still, silent, observing, always, waiting for acknowledgement, for respect, for recognition. Fact and folklore, ledger and whisper, reality and myth, all merged. The parish, Mare Celestine, the swamp, inseparable threads, converging at the heart of the mystery. The deep bridge is clear. The climax reached not in a single violent act, but in accumulation, in ritual observation, disappearance, and memory. The human and spectral intertwining, the swamp claiming recording observing, the watchers patient, deliberate, inevitable. Every step, every gesture, every breath mattered. The bayou alive, persistent, and unrelenting. The winter of 1890 settled over Bayou Teche. Fog thickened, cypress knees jutting like watchful sentinels. The river, dark and reflective, carried the memory of months past. Disappearances, lanterns drifting, shadows stretching impossibly long. The parish had changed, subtly, irrevocably. The families along the riverbanks moved with caution. Footsteps measured. Lanterns swung carefully. Offerings left meticulously at each bend. Herbs arranged at forked paths. Prayers whispered into the mist. A quiet acknowledgement that the watchers remained, patient, insistent. The ledger entries, newspapers, and official reports continued to record anomalies. Fate unknown, repeated across the pages. Yet the documents themselves could not convey the weight of dread, nor the intensity of fear lingering in the eyes of survivors. A boy returned from the cane fields, eyes wide, whispering of floating lanterns and voices calling names. A merchant documented strange lights along the Teche. Sketches drawn hastily, noting the swamp woman, tall, wrapped in cloth, lantern held high, Mare Celestine, her presence enduring, guiding, warning, mediating between the living and those who had vanished. Dream narratives persisted. Dreams where lanterns floated above the water, shadows gliding against the wind, footsteps echoing where no one walked. Visions of Mare Celestine moving silently along the banks, guiding the lost, sometimes returning them, altered, eyes haunted, voices trembling, stories repeated from cabin to cabin, whispered around fires, carried along paths, preserved in memory, a living record beyond ink and paper. Fact layer and folklore layer continuing to intertwine. The swamp itself seemed alive, humming with accumulated memory. The fog thick, swallowing sound and light. Waters reflecting distorted moonlight. Every ripple carrying an echo of those who had disappeared. The watchers persistent, unyielding, unseen, yet known. Shadows shifted even during day sunlight, bending strangely through moss-draped branches. Reflections of lanterns on water, lingering shapes, movement in the periphery. The parish, long acquainted with loss and legend, moved quietly under this vigilance, observing, respecting, acknowledging. Families maintained rituals, coins placed along the banks, small charms tied to low-hanging branches, herbs scattered carefully, children reminded of the stories. Do not wander alone after dusk. Leave something for the watchers. They remember. The swamp had claimed enough already, its patience unbroken, its memory long, and the survivors adapted, living in harmony, wary of the unseen. The boundary between reality and myth solidified yet porous, a lesson etched into the communal consciousness. Letters discovered years later corroborated oral histories. Travelers recalling floating lanterns, whispers over water, shadows shifting against the fog. The ledger confirmed disappearances, the parish's memory preserved in both ink and story. Historians later noted the convergence of evidence. Fact layer validating folklore layer, and vice versa. Each disappearance, each sighting, each ritual. An indelible mark on the fabric of Bayou Teche. The swamp's presence undeniable, The echoes of 1890 lingered, carried forward in songs and prayers, in whispered cautionary tales, in communal memory. Even decades later, elders recalled lanterns floating along the Teche, shadows moving unnaturally, voices calling names. Some children claimed to see the swamp woman, a faint glow on the river, her silhouette between the trees, guiding, observing, judging. The motif persisted. What watches from the Cypress shadows, repeated across generations, a refrain embedded in culture, a question without a definitive answer. Mère Celestine herself became legend, an enduring figure in the oral histories, her presence bridging fact and folklore, guiding, warning, observing. The swamp's claim remained, its watchers vigilant. The human stories intertwined with spectral memory, lessons passed silently, gestures preserved. The parish knew. The river remembered. The shadows moved, and the watchers waited. Even today, the echoes remain. The fog curling over the Teche, lantern-like glimmers reflected on dark water. Footsteps heard where no one walks, whispers floating across the marsh. Descendants of those who survived tell stories at twilight about vanished neighbors, strange lights, and the swamp woman. Their voices tremble, yet the stories persist. A reminder that history never fully concludes, that memory and myth are intertwined, that the watchers of Bayou Teche remain patient, eternal. And as you listen now, consider the river, the fog, the cypress shadows stretching long and low. What might still be watching? What traces of the vanished linger among the reeds, the water, the trees? The events of 1890 left a mark, a rhythm of presence, an awareness that the swamp is not empty, that it observes, that it remembers, and that some questions remain unanswered. You may never walk the banks of Bayou Teche, yet the story persists in ledger entries, in oral histories, in the very fog and shadow that envelop the river. Fact and folklore, intertwined, inseparable, a lesson for all who listen. The watchers remain, the swamp remembers, and the lanterns still flicker in the mist. You have just heard a story from history, a record never fully closed, of disappearances, of watchers, of the unseen, of Mère Celestine's lantern guiding and warning. Remember, tread carefully, leave your offerings, and never look back. The bayou waits, patient, silent, eternal, and always watching.